"We're not nurses," my son shouted when I needed help after surgery. The words hung in the air of my suburban Chicago home, sharper than the pain from my freshly operated knee. I lay there on my living room recliner, a 72-year-old man, unable to get up by himself, while my own flesh and blood refused to help me. It was a brisk autumn day, leaves from the maple trees I'd planted 30 years ago now drifting across my front yard. I had asked Richard and his wife Megan to stay with me for just a few days until I could manage on my own again. The doctors had made it clear that I would need assistance during the first weeks after my total knee replacement. "Dad, we both have full-time jobs. We can't just drop everything to take care of you," Megan added in that cool, matter-of-fact tone she always used when family matters became inconvenient for her. I tried to shift my position on the recliner, a stabbing pain shooting through my leg. "I'm not asking you to drop everything. I just need a little help for a few days." Richard crossed his arms over his chest, a gesture he'd been making since his teenage years whenever he closed himself off. "Dad, be reasonable. You can hire a home health aide. You've got plenty of money in the bank." Yes, I did. After 45 years working my way up from factory floor to plant manager at Midwest. Manufacturing, I had saved well, but that wasn't the point. The point was that my only son, for whom I had sacrificed everything, couldn't spare a few days to help his father. "It's not about the money, Richard," I said quietly. "It's about family helping family." Megan sighed, dramatically. "Frank, we don't live in the last century. Children aren't their parents' retirement plan. There are professional services for this sort of thing." I looked at her. This woman who had married my son 15 years ago. Always perfectly dressed, always controlled, always practical. She worked as an executive at a marketing firm, probably, earning more than Richard with his accounting practice. Childless by choice. "We don't have time for children," she had once said at a family dinner when my sister carefully inquired about grandchildren. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. When my wife Sarah fell ill with cancer 8 years ago, it never occurred to me to hire a service. I cared for her myself 3 years until the bitter end, while still working full-time. But that was a different generation, as Megan often reminded me. "We can help you find a good home health service," offered Richard, already pulling out his smartphone. "I've heard from colleagues that Senior Care Plus is very reliable." I just nodded, too tired and disappointed to argue further. "Then please, do that." They stayed another hour, organizing a home health service through Richard's smartphone that would begin the next morning, ordered me a pizza for dinner, which they paid for, their generosity knew no bounds, and then left my house, with relieved expressions. As the door closed behind them, I finally let fall the tears I had been holding back the entire time, not because of the pain in my knee, but because of the pain in my heart. The home health service was actually very good. Nurse Denise, a robust woman in her 50s with a friendly smile and efficient movements, came 3 times daily. She helped me get up, wash, dress, prepared my meals, and gave me my medications. She was kind and competent, but she wasn't family. In the quiet hours, between her visits, I sat in my armchair by the window, watched the street, and thought about my life, about the decisions I had made, about my relationship with my son. Where had I gone wrong? Had I been too strict, too lenient? Had I taught him the wrong values? Or was it simply the time we lived in, this era of constant hurry, of careers more important than family, of practical solutions instead of personal sacrifice? After a week, Richard called to ask how I was doing. "Fine," I answered curtly. "Nurse Denise is very helpful." "See, I told you a professional service was the best solution," he said, and I could hear the self-satisfaction in his voice. "How much longer will you need the service?" "The doctor says at least another 2 weeks until I'm reasonably independent." "That's not too long. And after that, maybe you'll just need someone to check on you once a day." I was silent for a moment. "Yes, maybe. Dad, is everything all right? You sound different." "I'm fine, Richard, just tired." "I understand. Well, we'll come visit as soon as we have time." Megan's in the middle of a big project at work and I'm swamped with end-of-quarter reports. Of course. You're busy, I understand. After the call, I stared at the silent phone for a long time. Then I made a decision. The next day, I asked Nurse Denise to help me get some papers from my study. She willingly helped, brought me my old briefcase, and set me up at the desk. "May I ask what you're planning, Mr. Mitchell?" she asked curiously. "I need to take care of some financial matters," I replied vaguely. When she had gone, I opened the briefcase and took out the documents I hadn't touched since Sarah's death. Our will, our financial statements, the papers for our house, and the various investments we had made over the years. I had always planned to leave everything to Richard. It was a given for me. He was our only child, our heir. But now, with trembling hands, I picked up the phone and dialed the number of my longtime attorney, Tom Harrison. "Tom, this is Frank Mitchell. I need to speak with you on an important matter." 3 weeks later, I was reasonably mobile again. I could manage short distances with a walker and only needed the home health service once a day. Richard and Megan hadn't visited me once during those 3 weeks. Too busy, too important appointments, too far to drive for a short visit. I had time to refine my plan and make all necessary preparations. Tom Harrison had handled everything with his usual efficiency, and we had long discussions about my intentions. "Are you sure about this, Frank?" he had asked. "This is a big change." "I'm sure, Tom. As sure as I've ever been about anything in my life." On a sunny Saturday in October, almost a month after my surgery, Richard finally came to visit, alone, without Megan, who had an important appointment with friends. He looked good in his expensive cashmere sweater and tailored pants. Success suited him. As he entered, he gave me a critical once-over. "You look better, Dad. The color has returned to your face." "Yes, I'm feeling much better. Thank you." He sat down across from me and accepted the coffee I offered. I had made it myself, insisted on it, despite my still limited mobility. "I need to talk to you about something important, Richard," I began after we had exchanged some small talk. He looked up from his smartphone, which he checked every few minutes. "Yes? What's it about?" "About my will and my future plans." That caught his interest. He set the phone aside. "Your will? Have you made changes?" "Yes, I have. Substantial changes." I took a deep breath. "I've sold the house." His eyes widened. "You've what?" "But this is the family home. I grew up here." "Yes, that's true, but I need a smaller, more accessible home. This house has too many stairs for an old man with a new knee." But, he seemed to struggle with words. "Why didn't you consult me? I could have helped you find another solution." "Like you helped me after my surgery?" I asked quietly. He had the decency to look embarrassed. "That was different. We were really very busy." "Yes, you always are." I took a sip of my coffee. "Anyway, it's done. I've bought a nice ground-floor condo in a new senior living community. Barrier-free access, community spaces, a small garden. And best of all, there's an integrated care facility in case I should need more help someday." Richard stared at me. "And what about the rest? The money from the house sale? Your savings?" Here it was, the moment of truth. "I've established a foundation. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation, named after your mother. It will support elderly, people who have no family to care for them, or whose family cannot or will not help." His face lost all color. "A foundation? You're spending all your money on a foundation?" "Not all of it," I reassured him. "I've kept enough for myself to live comfortably and to pay for my own care if necessary. I don't want to be a burden to you. But the inheritance, you will get the condo when I die, and a reasonable sum. But the bulk goes to the foundation." Richard jumped up, his face now red with anger. "You can't do this. That's the family fortune. That's my inheritance." I remained seated calmly, looking up at him. "It's my money, Richard. I earned it. I can do with it what I think is right." You're only doing this to punish me because of what happened after the surgery. No, Richard. I'm doing it because I've realized there are people who need help much more desperately than you do. People without your privileges, without your opportunities. He clutched his forehead, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. This is insane. You're not yourself. The medication, the surgery, they've affected your mind. I smiled sadly. My mind is as clear as ever. Tom Harrison made sure of that before he drew up the papers. Everything is legally watertight. Richard began pacing around the living room, hands buried in his hair. Megan will freak out. She's always said that with your inheritance, we could finally buy that vacation home in Aspen. That didn't surprise me. Of course they had already made plans for my money. I'm sorry if I've derailed your plans, I said, though I wasn't really sorry. But perhaps this is an opportunity for you to reconsider your priorities. He stopped and stared at me. What do you mean by that? I mean that there are more important things in life than vacation homes in Aspen. Things like family, like being there for each other when it counts. So you admit it's a punishment, he cried triumphantly. I shook my head. No, Richard, it's a lesson. One I apparently never taught you properly, and I'm sorry for that. The lesson that family is more than a word, that it means responsibility, sacrifice, love that's present not just when it's convenient. He snorted derisively. Spare me the sermons, Dad. You're bitter and vindictive, that's all. If that's your opinion, I can't change it, I said calmly. But the decision is made and the papers are signed. Richard grabbed his coat. We'll see. I'll talk to a lawyer. This can't be legal. Do what you think is right. But Tom Harrison has secured everything. It's my money, my decision, and I was of sound mind when I made it. He went to the door, turned around once more. His face was a mask of anger and disbelief. You'll regret this, Dad. I only regret that it had to come to this, I replied. The door closed behind him, louder than necessary. I sat in the living room, in the house that would soon no longer be mine, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. Richard kept his word and consulted a lawyer, several in fact, but there was nothing they could do. All documents were in order, all legal requirements met. I had transferred a large portion of my assets to a charitable foundation, and that was my right. 2 months later, I moved into my new condo. It was smaller than my house, but bright and friendly, with wide doors for my walker, which I still needed on bad days, and a barrier-free bathroom. The move was exhausting but liberating. So many things I no longer needed. So many memories I had to let go of. I heard nothing from Richard and Megan. No calls, no visits. As if I had disappeared from their lives along with the money they had hoped for. It hurt, but not as much as I had expected. The rift between us had opened long before. The matter of the will had only made it visible. In my new condo, I got to know my neighbors, other seniors, many of them alone like me. We began to help each other, cook together, play cards, organize outings. I found new friends, new interests, a new life. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation took shape. I worked closely with Tom Harrison, who sat on the board, and we began to help elderly people who had no support from their families. We funded home care services, organized visiting programs, helped with home adaptations. It was satisfying work that gave meaning to my days. Almost a year passed without hearing from Richard. Then, on a rainy November day, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and found my son standing there. He looked different, tired, somehow smaller. The expensive sweater had given way to a simple shirt, and he wore jeans instead of tailored pants. "Hello, Dad," he said quietly. "Richard," I nodded. "Come in." He entered the condo, looked around. "Nice place you have here." "Thank you. It's not big, but it's enough for me." We sat in my small living room, and I offered him coffee, which he accepted. For a while we sat in silence, neither knowing quite how to begin. Finally he cleared his throat. "Megan and I have separated." That surprised me. "I'm sorry to hear that." He shrugged. It was a long time coming. We had different ideas about life. I see. After the thing with your will, she was angry, very angry. It was all about the money, about what we had lost, what we couldn't do anymore. He stared into his coffee. It made me think. About my marriage, about my life, about what really matters. I said nothing, letting him talk. I left the accounting firm. He continued. I'm working for a legal aid service now. The pay is terrible, but it feels right. Now I was really surprised. Richard, who had always strived for status and wealth, was working for a non-profit organization. That's quite a change, I remarked. He nodded. Yes, but a necessary one. He looked up, met my eyes directly. You were right, Dad, about everything. I had my priorities all wrong. I had forgotten what really matters. I felt my eyes grow, moist, and blinked away the tears. It's never too late to realize that, Richard. I'm here to apologize, he said, his voice firmer now. For everything. For the way I treated you after the surgery and before. For the way I lived. For the person I had become. I reached out, placed my hand on his. I accept your apology, son. Now it was his eyes that glistened. I have something else to say. He took a deep breath. I'm proud of you. For what you've done with the foundation. It's a wonderful legacy for Mom. And for you. Those were words I had never expected to hear. Words that warmed my heart like nothing before. Thank you, Richard. That means a lot to me. I would like to help if you'll let me, with the foundation. I may not be an expert in elder care, but I know numbers. I could be useful. I smiled. For the first time in a long time, a genuine, heartfelt smile. I would be happy to have you involved. We talked for a long time that day, about the past, about the mistakes we had both made, about the future that lay ahead. It wasn't all perfect. There was still much to heal, much to forgive. But it was a beginning. When Richard left, he hugged me goodbye. A real hug, not that fleeting, formal gesture that had become customary between us in recent years. I love you, Dad, he said softly. I love you too, son, I replied, my voice rough with emotion. In the months that followed, we slowly built a new relationship. Richard visited regularly, helped with the foundation work, accompanied me to doctor's appointments. When I caught a bad cold and needed help again, he was there, without hesitation, without complaint. We're not nurses, he had once shouted. Now he was exactly that for me. Not out of duty or compulsion, but out of love and the understanding that family means more than blood relation. That it means being there for each other, in good times and bad. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation grew and thrived under our joint leadership. We reached more people, expanded our programs, made a real difference in the lives of many elderly people who would otherwise have been forgotten. And in this shared project, in this shared mission, Richard and I found not only each other but also ourselves, the people we were meant to be, the values that truly mattered. It had never been my intention to disinherit my son to punish him. I wanted to teach him a lesson, yes, but mostly I wanted to do something meaningful with what I had achieved in life. Something that would endure beyond me. That this decision had also set my son back on the right path was an unexpected but welcome gift. Proof that sometimes the hardest lessons are the most valuable. That true love isn't always about giving what the other person wants, but what they need. When I celebrated my 75th birthday, surrounded by new friends, by the people the foundation had helped, and by my son who had once again become the man I raised him to be, I knew I had made the right decision. We're not nurses, my son had once shouted in a moment of selfishness and convenience. Now he was so much more than that. He was my son again, in the truest sense of the word. And I was proud of him, proud of us both, for the journey we had taken, for the lessons we had learned, for the family we had become again. Not through compulsion or duty, but through insight, forgiveness, and the realization that true values are not measured in bank accounts, but in the lives we touch, the people we love, the difference we make in the world. That was my revenge, if you want to call it that. Not a revenge of retaliation or anger, but a revenge of love and wisdom. A revenge that didn't destroy, but built up. That didn't separate, but united. A revenge that set us both free. Time passes faster when you get older. The years fly by, like autumn leaves in the wind. When I turned 80, the Sarah Mitchell Foundation had already helped over 100 elderly people in Chicago and the surrounding area. We had a small but dedicated team working under Richard's financial leadership and my general guidance. "We should expand, Dad," Richard said one day as we sat in my condo going over the foundation's finances. "There are so many people in other cities who could use our help." I looked at him. This man who had once thought only of his own well-being and now spoke with shining eyes about expanding our charitable work. Sometimes I could hardly believe how much he had changed. "That would require more funds," I pointed out, "and more staff." "I have an idea about that," he replied with a smile. "Remember Jake Wilson, my old college buddy who works at First National Bank now?" I nodded. Jake had visited a few times, a quiet, thoughtful man, quite unlike the typical bankers I knew. "He's willing to set up a corporate social responsibility program with us. The bank would match every senior project we undertake with an equal donation." I was impressed. "You arranged this?" Richard shrugged modestly. "I just had a few conversations." Jake was immediately enthusiastic, especially after meeting you and understanding what our foundation is really about. These simple words filled me with more pride than any promotion or professional success in my life ever had. My son was carrying forward my vision, even expanding it, making it his own. With the support of First National Bank and later other companies, the Sarah Mitchell Foundation grew beyond Chicago's borders. We opened offices in Detroit, Cleveland, Minneapolis. We developed new programs, not just for practical help, but also for social networking, for cultural offerings, for everything that made the lives of elderly people richer and more dignified. Richard was the driving force behind this expansion. He traveled around the country, spoke with potential supporters, built a network. He worked harder than he ever had in his accounting career, but now with a gleam in his eyes that I had never seen before. He had found his calling. Our relationship deepened in these years. We were no longer just father and son, but partners, friends, allies in a common mission. We still argued occasionally. Two generations with different perspectives. Can't always agree, but our disputes were now respectful, constructive, marked by mutual esteem. In my 82nd year, my health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, a little more fatigue, a little less energy. The doctor spoke of age-related changes, nothing to worry too much about. But I felt that my time as an active leader of the foundation was coming to an end. On my 83rd birthday, during a small celebration in my condo, I took Richard aside. "I think it's time for me to step back a bit," I said. He looked at me with concern. "Are you not feeling well, Dad? Should I consult a specialist?" I smiled at his immediate concern. How different his behavior was now compared to that day after my knee surgery. "No, I'm fine. For my age, anyway. But the foundation needs a chairman with more energy, with new ideas, with a future ahead of him, not just a past." Richard placed his hand on mine. "You are the heart of the foundation, Dad. It bears Mom's name, but it's your vision." "And now it's your vision," I replied. "You've carried it forward, made it bigger than I ever could have. It's time for you to officially take the lead as well." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "If you're sure, then I'll do my best to continue your legacy." "Our legacy," I corrected him. "It's as much yours now as it is mine." We agreed that I would serve as honorary chairman while Richard took over operational leadership. It was a fluid, natural transition, not an abrupt change. I was still involved, visited the offices, talked with the staff and the seniors we supported, but the daily decisions, the strategic planning, the future of the foundation, that was now in Richard's hands, and they were good hands. That year, Richard also met Linda, a social worker who worked for our foundation in Detroit. She was 45, divorced, with a 12-year-old daughter named Emma. Unlike Megan, she was warm-hearted, pragmatic without being cold, dedicated to her work and the people she helped. When Richard first brought her to visit me in Chicago, I liked her immediately. She had no pretensions, no ambitions for luxury or status. She seemed to appreciate Richard for the man he had become, not for his name or position. "She's special," I said to Richard after she had left. He smiled, an open, happy smile that I had seen too rarely on his face. "Yes, she is." They married the following spring, a small, intimate ceremony in a Chicago park. I walked Linda down the aisle, an honor that moved me to tears. Emma, her daughter, was the flower girl, a bright girl with clear eyes and a serious face that transformed into a radiant smile when you made her laugh. After the wedding, they moved to Chicago, into a spacious but not excessively luxurious apartment near my senior living community. Richard commuted to Detroit when necessary, but the foundation's headquarters remained in Chicago, and that was now his main workplace. Emma and I quickly became friends. She was a thoughtful child who asked many questions, loved chess, and showed a gift for mathematics that reminded me of my own in younger years. I began to tutor her, not because she needed it, but because we both enjoyed the time together. "She adores you," Linda said to me one day as we watched Emma and Richard play soccer in the park. "She constantly talks about Grandpa Frank and the stories you tell her." Grandpa Frank. The title filled me with a happiness I hadn't thought possible. Richard and Megan had not wanted children. I had resigned myself to never being a grandfather, and now in my old age I suddenly had a granddaughter. Not by blood, but by something that was perhaps even stronger, by choice, by affection, by the family we had created. On my 85th birthday, the foundation threw a big party. Over 200 people came, staff, supporters, seniors we had helped, and their families. It was a surprise that Richard, Linda, and Emma had planned for months. When I entered the festively decorated hall and saw all these people standing up and applauding, I was overwhelmed. Richard led me to a place of honor on the stage and gave a speech that moved me to tears. "Just over 10 years ago," he began, "my father lay helpless in his house after knee surgery. He asked me and my then wife for help. And do you know what I said?" He paused, his face serious. I said, "We're not nurses." I told my own father, the man who had sacrificed everything for me, who had raised me, who had always been there for me, that I had no time for him. A murmur went through the hall. Richard raised his hand. Yes, I was that person, selfish, materialistic, caught up in a life that revolved only around myself. I was lost without knowing it. He looked at me. But my father, my wise, brave father, he did something that changed my life forever. He established this foundation. He took the money that I assumed would one day be mine and used it to help others. Others who, like him, needed support, who had no family to care for them. Richard's voice broke and he took a moment to compose himself. I was angry. I felt cheated. I even threatened legal action. He shook his head at his former self. But then I began to understand. I began to see what my father was really trying to give me. Not money or possessions, but something much more valuable. A lesson about what truly matters in life. About family, about responsibility, about humanity. He looked around the hall into the faces of all the people whose lives our foundation had touched. This foundation, the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, named after my late mother, is the greatest gift my father ever gave me. It gave me purpose, a calling. It helped me become a better person. He turned directly to me, tears glistening in his eyes. Thank you, Dad. Thank you for having the courage to show me the truth even when it was painful. Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for everything. I stood up, embraced my son in front of all these people, prouder of him than I had ever thought possible. The celebration was wonderful, but exhausting for a man my age. When I returned to my condo later that evening, accompanied by Richard, Linda, and Emma, I was tired but happy. "Grandpa, I have one more gift for you," Emma said excitedly as we settled in the living room. She handed me a carefully wrapped package. When I opened it, I found a hand-bound book. "The Story of Grandpa Frank and the Sarah Mitchell Foundation," read the cover, in Emma's careful, childish handwriting. I flipped through the pages. It was an illustrated history of our foundation, with drawings by Emma, photos contributed by Linda, and text that Richard had helped compose. The story began with me alone after surgery and ended with the large family we now were, not just Richard, Linda, and Emma, but all the foundation staff, all the seniors we supported, the whole community we had built. On the last page was a simple sentence: "Sometimes you have to lose to win." I looked at Emma. "Did you write that?" She nodded proudly. "Dad told me about before. How you gave the money to the foundation instead of giving it to him. How he was angry at first, but then understood that it's more important to help others than to be rich." From the mouth of a child, it sounded so simple, so clear. Perhaps it was. That night, as I lay in bed looking back on a life that was so much richer and more fulfilled than I could ever have imagined, I thought of Sarah, of the woman I had loved for so many years, whom I had cared for when she fell ill, whose name now stood for something greater than both of us. "Do you see this, Sarah?" I whispered into the darkness. "Do you see what our son has become? What all of us have become?" I felt her presence, as I often did in quiet moments, a sense of peace and approval. Yes, she saw it. She was proud of all of us. The years passed. The foundation continued to grow under Richard's leadership. Emma became a teenager, then a young woman who decided to study medicine, inspired, she said, by the stories I had told her about Sarah's illness and the care of elderly people. I grew older, weaker, but never lonely, never forgotten. In my 90th year, I moved into an assisted living unit within our senior community. It was my decision. I didn't want to be a burden to Richard and his family, and I wanted the same professional care that we offered to others. Richard protested at first. "You could live with us, Dad. We have room. We would take care of you." I smiled at the irony. "I thought you weren't nurses." He laughed, a little embarrassed. "That was a different life. A different Richard." "I know," I said gently, "and I'm so proud of the man you've become. But this is my decision. I want to live in the community we've created. I want to be surrounded by the people we help, and I want you and Linda and Emma to live your own lives, without the daily burden of caring for an old man." He eventually accepted my decision, but promised to visit me daily. A promise he kept, as did Linda and Emma. In my final years, I was surrounded by love, by respect, by the knowledge that I had created something that would endure. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation was now one of the most respected senior aid organizations in the Midwest, a model that others emulated. And Richard, my son, my pride, had become a man any father would admire, a man of integrity, of compassion, with a deep understanding of the true values in life. When I felt in my 93rd year that my time was coming to an end, I gathered Richard, Linda, and Emma in my small apartment. I wanted to tell them something important, something I had carried in my heart for a long time. "Many years ago," I began, "I made a decision that changed everything. A decision born out of pain and disappointment, but one that led to something wonderful." I looked each of them in the eye. "I want you to know that I have never regretted that decision, not one day, not 1 hour." Richard took my hand. "Neither have I, Dad. Even though I was too blind to see it at the time, it was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Me too," Emma said softly. "Without the foundation, Mom and I would never have met Dad. We wouldn't be the family we are now." "Family," I said, savoring the word. "That's what it's all about, isn't it? Not blood or names or inheritance, but the people we love, the people we are there for, the people who are there for us." They nodded, tears in their eyes. "We're not nurses," my son had once shouted. A sentence that had deeply hurt me, a sentence that had opened a rift between us that seemed unbridgeable. But now, at the end of my life, surrounded by the family we had created, not by birth, but by choice, by love, by shared values and experiences, I knew that this rift had not only been bridged but completely healed. Sometimes it takes a radical cut to allow something new to grow. Sometimes you have to let go to hold on to what really matters. Sometimes you have to lose to win. In my final days, as my strength waned and I slept more than I was awake, I was never alone. Richard, Linda, and Emma took turns at my bedside. Foundation staff came to say goodbye. Seniors we had helped brought flowers and cards and words of thanks. When the final moment came, it was Richard who held my hand. My son. My heir. Not in the material sense, but in everything that truly mattered. Linda sat on my other side, her gentle presence a comfort, while Emma stood at the foot of the bed, her young face solemn but composed, already showing the strength of the doctor she would one day become. The winter sunlight filtered through the window, casting a golden glow across the room. Outside, snow was falling, soft, silent, transforming the world into something pure and new. I could hear distant laughter from the community room down the hall, life continuing its steady rhythm even as mine was ebbing away. "It's okay, Dad," Richard whispered, his grip firm and reassuring. "You can let go now. We're all here with you. We will carry on. We will continue your work. Your legacy is safe." I looked at him, really looked at him, taking in every detail of his face. The lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a decade ago. The gray at his temples that matched my own from years past. But most of all, the depth in his eyes, the compassion, the wisdom that had been hard-won through his own journey from selfishness to service. I smiled, one last time. "Our legacy," I corrected him weakly, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was always ours, Richard. From the moment you decided to be part of it, from the moment you understood." Emma stepped forward, took my other hand. "Grandpa," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "I promise we'll keep building what you started. I'll become the best doctor I can be. I'll help people like you taught me to." Linda leaned in, kissed my forehead. "Rest easy, Frank. Your family is whole. Your work continues. Nothing that matters is lost." A profound peace washed over me then, a certainty that transcended the physical pain, the labored breathing, the failing body. I had done what I was meant to do in this world. I had loved. I had built. I had taught. And most importantly, I had forgiven, allowing healing to replace bitterness, allowing wisdom to triumph over pride. With these thoughts cradling me, I let go, peacefully, fulfilled, knowing that I had not lived in vain, that I was leaving something that would endure, a foundation that would continue to lift up the forgotten, a family bound not just by blood, but by shared purpose, a lesson about love and values that would be passed down through generations. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the veil of this world, Sarah was smiling and nodding in approval. "We did it, my love," I thought, as consciousness began to fade. "We raised a good son after all. It just took a detour to make him become the man he was always meant to be." "We're not nurses," he had once shouted, words that had cut deeper than any surgical blade. But in the end, he had become so much more than a nurse. He had become a son who understood the meaning of family, a husband who built a marriage on respect and shared values rather than ambition, a father who taught by example rather than words, a leader who served rather than commanded, a person who, in his own way, was making the world a little better, a little kinder, a little more just. And that, ultimately, is all we can hope for from our children. All we can hope for from ourselves. Not perfection, but growth. Not unbroken paths, but journeys that, however winding, lead us home to what matters most. As my eyes closed for the final time, I wasn't leaving. I was arriving. The inheritance. Richard Mitchell stood at the window of his father's study, watching as the last of the funeral guests departed. The February snow was falling more heavily now, blanketing the grounds of the senior living community in pristine, white. Behind him, Linda was quietly organizing the condolence cards that had arrived by the dozens, from foundation staff, from seniors they had helped over the years, from corporate partners, from old neighbors and friends. He would have been surprised, Richard said softly, not turning from the window. He never realized how many lives he touched. Linda came to stand beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. I think he knew, in his way. He just didn't need the recognition. Emma entered the room, still wearing the black dress from the service, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, and 22. In her first year of medical school, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that reminded Richard powerfully of Frank. I found this in Grandpa's nightstand, she said, holding out a sealed envelope. It has your name on it, Dad. Richard took the envelope, recognizing his father's neat, precise handwriting. The paper was high quality, the kind Frank had always preferred for important correspondence. With a slight tremor in his fingers, Richard broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Richard, if you're reading this, then I've moved on to whatever comes next. Don't grieve too much. I've had a good long life, especially these last years with you, Linda and Emma. You gave me the greatest gift a father could ask for, the knowledge that I raised a son who became a good man. There's a small safe behind. The painting in my bedroom, the one of Lake Michigan that your mother always loved. The combination is your birthday. Inside you'll find a few things I wanted you to have personally, not as part of any official bequest or foundation business. Your mother's wedding ring, which she asked me to give to you when the time was right. I think that time is now. There's also her journal from the year we found out she was pregnant with you. I've never read it, but I think she would want you to have that piece of her. There's a wooden box my father made, your grandfather whom you never met. It contains the pocket watch his father gave him and that he gave to me. It should go to you now and someday to someone you love. Finally, there's a letter I wrote the day after you told me you couldn't help with my recovery, the day that changed both our lives. I never intended for you to read it. I wrote it in anger and hurt. But I'm including it now because I want you to understand something important. Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our greatest transformation. I kept it all these years as a reminder of how close we came to losing each other, and how grateful I am that we found our way back. Take care of our foundation, Richard. Take care of our family. Remember that nothing material you leave behind matters as much as the values you pass on and the lives you touch. With all my love. Dad. Richard folded the letter carefully, his vision blurred with tears. Dad? Emma asked, concerned. What is it? Just your grandfather, Richard managed, passing the letter to Linda. Still teaching me even now. They found the safe exactly where Frank had described. Inside was a small velvet box containing Sarah's delicate gold wedding band, a leather-bound journal with her flowing handwriting, a hand-carved wooden box, with the antique pocket watch and a sealed envelope yellowed with age, labeled simply, "The day after." Richard held the old envelope for a long moment, uncertain. You don't have to read it now, Linda said gently, or ever if you don't want to. No, Richard decided. Dad wanted me to see it. It's part of our story. The letter inside was written on lined paper, the handwriting more jagged than Frank's, usual careful script, betraying his emotional state when he'd written it. I don't know why I'm writing this, no one will ever read it. But today my son, my only child, the boy I raised alone after Sarah died, the young man whose college education I worked overtime to pay for, whose first car I bought, whose wedding I funded, this son looked me in the eye and told me he was too busy to help me recover from surgery. We're not nurses, he said, as if I were asking him to change bedpans rather than just check on his father a few times a day. I've never felt so alone, so betrayed, so worthless. Is this what I raised? A man who measures everything in terms of convenience and cost? Who sees his father as a burden rather than a person? Who values a vacation home in Aspen more than family obligation? Where did I go wrong? Did I give him too much? Not enough? Did I fail to teach him what matters? Or is this just the world now? Everyone for themselves, family bonds disposable when they become inconvenient. I'm angry. I'm hurt. Part of me wants to call him right now and tell him he's cut off. No inheritance, nothing. Let him see how it feels to be abandoned. But that's the anger talking. I need to think more clearly. To find a response that isn't just punishment but teaching. Sarah would know what to do. She always saw more clearly than I did. Maybe that's it. Sarah. What would honor her memory? What would turn this pain into something meaningful? Something that might even someday help Richard understand what he's lost sight of? I need to sleep now. The pain medication is making it hard to think. But tomorrow I'll call Tom Harrison. I have the beginning of an idea. Richard lowered the letter, his hands shaking. The raw pain in his father's words cut through him, reopening a wound he'd thought long healed. Dad? Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. She was looking at him with concern. I'm okay, he assured her, though his voice was unsteady. It's just seeing it from his perspective, realizing how much I hurt him. Linda took the letter gently from his hands, scanned it, then met his eyes. But he forgave you, Richard. Completely. That's what matters. Not just forgave, Richard said quietly. He transformed it, turned his pain into purpose, turned my mistake into a chance for redemption. He looked around the study, at the photos on the walls, images of foundation events, seniors whose lives they'd touched, family gatherings. He could have just cut me off, been bitter. Instead, he built this, all of this. Emma picked up Sarah's wedding ring, turned it thoughtfully in the light. Do you think you would have changed without the foundation? If Grandpa had just left, everything to you as planned. Richard considered the question seriously. No, he finally admitted. I don't think I would have. I was too caught up in status and appearances and what Megan and I thought success looked like. I needed the wake-up call. He smiled ruefully. Your grandfather always said I had to learn things the hard way. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Tom Harrison, now in his 80s but still sharp, still serving on the foundation's board. Sorry to intrude, he said, but we need to discuss some matters about the foundation. The board meeting is set for next week and there are decisions to be made. Richard nodded. Of course, Tom, come in. As they settled around Frank's desk, Tom opened his briefcase and removed a folder. Frank left very specific instructions about the foundation's future. He wanted me to review them with you privately before the board meeting. Tom handed Richard a document. This is Frank's vision for the next phase of the Sarah Mitchell Foundation. He called it the expansion plan. He's been working on it for the past year, knowing his time was limited. Richard opened the folder to find detailed proposals for new programs. Intergenerational housing where college students could live rent-free in exchange for helping elderly residents. Telemedicine initiatives for homebound seniors. Advocacy work for elder rights and dignity. Partnerships with medical schools for geriatric training programs. He planned all this? Richard asked, amazed at the scope and detail. Tom nodded. Frank never stopped thinking ahead. But here's the most important part. He pointed to a notepaper clipped to the front page in Frank's handwriting. Richard, these are just suggestions. The foundation is yours to lead now, fully. And completely. I trust your judgment, your heart, and your vision. Change anything that doesn't fit your direction. Add what I haven't thought of. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation isn't about preserving my ideas in amber. It's about responding to real needs with compassion and innovation. I know you'll do that better than I could have imagined. The only thing I ask is that you remember why we started this work. Because every elderly person deserves dignity, connection, and care. Because family is what we make it, not just what we're born into. And because sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what we own, but what we give away. Richard read the note twice, then passed it to Linda and Emma. Even now, he said, softly, he's teaching me to let go. To trust myself. Tom smiled. That was Frank. Always looking ahead, always seeing the potential in people, especially you, Richard. He was so proud of the man you've become. After Tom left, Richard sat at his father's desk, now his desk, and looked at the three treasures from the safe. Sarah's ring, the pocket watch, and the journal. Tangible connections to his past, to the people who had shaped him. What are you thinking? Linda asked, resting her hand on his shoulder. I'm thinking about inheritance, Richard replied, about what we really pass on. He picked up the pocket watch, felt its solid weight in his palm. This watch has traveled through